In this video, we're going to talk about price discrimination and some pricing strategies for a monopoly. And in particular, we're going to be thinking about what we call linear pricing. So let's first talk about what price discrimination is. Price discrimination is essentially when a firm that has market power, meaning that the firm has control over the price. Price discrimination is when that firm sells the exact same good to different customers for different prices. And let's think first about why a firm would want to do this. And what we'll see is that a firm that can price discriminate can make more profit than a firm that can't price discriminate. So typically we'll refer to a monopoly that cannot price discriminate as a single price monopoly. What that means is they just charge a single price to all of the customers. Price discrimination is then when they'll be able to charge multiple prices. So let's just quickly review a single price monopoly. So remember, we're talking about a situation where we've got demand. Let's put up here a constant marginal cost. We could have an increasing marginal cost, but a lot of times when we're thinking about price discrimination, we think about constant marginal cost because it's a more simple situation to deal with. So we've got our constant marginal cost, we've got our marginal revenue curve, and so the firm is going to be maximizing profit by producing the quantity where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. So that happens right here. I usually call it QM. And then they're going to charge the price found by going up to the demand curve, so there's PM. So we've got the price and quantity for a single price monopoly. Consumer surplus would be up here. If we assume that fixed costs are zero, then marginal cost and average total cost are the same curve. And in that case, this rectangle right in here would be the profit that monopoly earns. It's also the case that this area out here we've talked about before, that's the deadweight loss of monopoly. And what we're going to see is that actually when a monopoly price discriminates, there are cases where that deadweight loss goes down, where efficiency, total surplus in the market actually increases. Let's start by thinking about when a firm can price discriminate. So there are two conditions that are necessary for a firm to be able to price discriminate, and that is that they first have to know something about the consumer's willingness to pay. So maybe it's that they know each consumer's maximum willingness to pay. That's rare, but that could be a situation. Maybe it's that they know that there are one group of consumers that have a high willingness to pay for the good and another group of consumers with a lower willingness to pay. Maybe a group that's older versus a group that's younger. So that's the first condition. They have to know something about the consumer's willingness to pay in order to pick the right price for that particular consumer. And then the second condition that has to hold is that the firm has to be able to prevent arbitrage. Now, arbitrage is the act of buying at a low price and selling at a high price. So in this case, if you've got two groups, let's say, and one group gets a discount and the other group doesn't, then there's going to be an incentive for the group that gets the discount to buy it at the discount and then sell it to the group that doesn't get the discount, maybe for a little bit less than what that group could buy it from the monopoly. That would be what we call arbitrage. So the firm has to be able to prevent that because they don't want the groups buying and selling between each other. The monopoly wants to be able to sell to each group. That's the only way they can increase profit. So if we're talking about services, then arbitrage is not a problem. You can't sell a haircut to a different person. I mean, you get the haircut. It's a service. So preventing arbitrage there is not a challenge typically. If we're talking about durable goods, it's more of a challenge. But there are ways that it can be done. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. So we're going to talk about different types of price discrimination. And the first one that we're going to think about is what we call third-degree price discrimination. Third-degree price discrimination. This also goes by the sometimes called group pricing. So for third-degree price discrimination, the firm is able to identify which group the consumer falls into. So there's going to be maybe a low willingness to pay and a high willingness to pay, and the firm is able to identify each particular customer in terms of which group they belong to. So it could be that the groups are identifiable because of their age, or it could be that they're identifiable because of their income. Maybe high-income people are willing to pay a higher price, and low-income people are willing to pay a lower price. So if the firm can observe their income, it knows which group they fall into. It could be that the groups are identifiable by geographic location, or it could be that they're identifiable by educational status, something like that. There's some identifying characteristic that allows the firm to be able to figure out which group that particular consumer falls into. And then, of course, the second condition is that they've got to be able to prevent arbitrage. They've got to be able to prevent the people in the low price group from selling it to the people who don't get the discount, the people in the higher price group. So you have a different price that's charged to each group, and then customers in each group can buy all they want at that price. So if you've picked a price to sell to the low willingness to pay group, and we'll see that that'll be a lower price than the price you charge to the high willingness to pay group, then the people in that low willingness to pay group can buy as many units as they want at that price. And that's referred to as linear pricing. Every unit you buy is at the exact same price, and you can buy as many as you want. So examples of this would be, say, student discounts, or maybe senior citizens discounts, where if you go to a restaurant, maybe maybe people who are older and on a fixed income have a lower willingness to pay for meals at a particular restaurant than younger people, and so those older people get a senior citizens discount. So maybe it's a percentage discount. Airline tickets are sold this way. It could be that we're talking about first class versus coach, or it could be that we're talking about the timing. So maybe there's a group of people who buy their tickets early and a group of people who wait till the last second. And maybe the airline charges those last second people a higher price for the exact same flight. It could be maybe early bird specials. People who are willing to get out and maybe stand in a line get a discounted price. So those are all examples of third-degree price discrimination. Sometimes what the firm will do is in the case of maybe student discounts or senior citizens discounts, they'll require proof of age. So maybe you have to show a student ID, or maybe you have to show your driver's license. It's also the case that, for example, something you wouldn't see, say, a grocery store giving a senior citizens discount. A restaurant might, because the restaurant knows that the person buying the food is going to turn around and eat the food. But if you're at a grocery store, you could be buying groceries for somebody else. So if the grocery store provided a senior citizens discount, then senior citizens could get grocery lists from younger people, go buy those groceries, and arbitrage the market. So you tend to see something where the firm has proof that the good is being consumed by the person that's buying the good. So maybe a movie ticket. So you sell the ticket and maybe students get a discount, and so you sell them a ticket of a particular color, and then you can even ask them to show their ID when they go into the theater to watch the movie. That way they can't turn around and sell that ticket to somebody else. So the way this works is simple. If we were to think about, say, two groups, let's suppose that we have our high willingness to pay group here, and we have our low willingness to pay group here, and I'm going to represent that high willingness to pay with a demand curve that's higher than the low willingness to pay. So there's the demand curve for the high willingness to pay group. There's the demand curve for the low willingness to pay group. Let's put our marginal cost on here. Let's assume that marginal cost is constant. So there's marginal cost, and it doesn't depend on which group you're selling the good to in terms of the marginal cost. So it's constant and it's identical between the two groups. So what you do is you look at the marginal revenue for each group. Here would be the marginal revenue that goes with that demand curve, and here would be the marginal revenue that goes with that demand curve. And so for the high willingness to pay group, the firm looks where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. It produces this quantity and then charges that group this price. So we could call that maybe QH and PH. And then for the low willingness to pay group, the firm looks where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost and produces that quantity for this group, we'll call it QL, and charges this price, PL. And you can see that the price that's charged to the low willingness to pay group is lower than the price that's charged to the high willingness to pay group. So conceptually, it's very simple. Let's work through a quick numerical example just to get an idea of what this would look like. There's a couple of little twists. This is straightforward, but there's a couple of things that are a little bit unique to this. So let's do a numerical example. And so let's suppose we have demand for the high willingness to pay group, high willingness to pay, and that demand curve looks like this. I'm going to say PH equals 36 minus 4QH. Nice linear demand curve. Let's have our low willingness to pay. And let's suppose that demand curve looks like this. PL equals 24 minus 4QL. So we've got two demand curves. Those are inverse demand curves because they are solved for P. What we're going to need to do in order to create the market demand curve, which we're going to want to do here in a second, is we're going to have to invert those to get the demand curve. And then we're going to add those two together to get the market demand curve. But first, let's suppose marginal cost is constant and equal to $4. So let's start by thinking about what would happen if this was a single price monopoly. So this is a monopoly that can't identify the two groups first. And let's just talk about what that monopoly would choose to do, right? So if the firm can't identify the people in the two groups, then these individually don't matter. What matters is the market demand curve. So what we need to do is we need to come up with the market demand curve. So let's start by thinking about a single price monopoly. And we're doing this just so that we have a basis of comparison, so that when we allow them to price discriminate, we can see how much more profit are they going to make and what are the prices going to look like compared to this situation. So let's invert each of these. So I'm going to invert. This is going to be 4QH equals 36 minus P. I'm going to divide through by 4. I'm going to get QH is equal to, that's going to be 9 minus P over 4. And I'm going to invert this one. I'm going to get 4QL equals 24 minus P. Divide through by 4. I get QL equals 6 minus P over 4. So there's my demand curve for the low willingness to pay and my demand curve for the high willingness to pay group. And again, those are just the inverses of these two. So it's the same functional relationship. Let's take a look at graphically what this looks like. So I've got here, I'm going to actually, let's do it this way. Okay, so we're going to put our high willingness to pay group here. We'll put our low willingness to pay group here, and we'll put our market here. So my high willingness to pay, when I'm graphing these, remember I'm graphing the inverse demand curve. So this high willingness to pay has an intercept of 36, right? And it comes down something like that. And the low willingness to pay has an intercept of 24, so it's somewhere up here. And it comes down. They both have the same slope of 4, right? So it goes down 1, down 4 over 1. So what we're going to do is over here we're going to draw the market demand curve. Now, if we're up here, let's put 36 on this picture. At any price between 36 and 24, I'm going to put 24 here. At any price between 36 and 24, the low willingness to pay people aren't buying because the choke price for that group is 24. They're not willing to pay any price greater than 24. So between here and here at those prices, it's just this portion of that demand curve. It's the exact same demand curve as that. Okay? But then at a price of 24, we've got to start adding up this quantity with this quantity. And so there's going to be a kink right here, and it's going to have less slope. It's going to look something like that. Okay? So that happens right there at a price of 24. So we know that for any, let's go ahead and say for any price between 36 and 24, if price falls in that range, then our demand curve is just this one, right? It's just Q equals 9 minus P over 4. That's this part of the demand curve, okay? But for any price, say price less than 24, the total quantity is going to be QH plus QL. It's going to be the sum of these two, right? And so if we add those up, let's do that right here. Our market demand curve would be QH, 9 minus P over 4, plus the quantity demanded by the low willingness to pay group, plus 6 minus P over 4, right? That gives us 15 minus 2P over 4, right? Which is equal to 15 minus P over 2. So there is my market demand curve right here. That's that portion where we've added up these two demand curves. So this would be Q equals 15 minus P over 2. That's that chunk right there. Okay, now what we want to do, now that we've got this market demand curve, is we need to invert this so we can figure out. Let me also say this is not the functional form for that. We need to invert these to get the functional forms for those. So let's invert them again. Invert again. Because remember, if you're going to graph it, you've got to have P on the vertical axis, because I didn't put it up here, but that's P, Q, P, Q, P, Q. All right, so if we invert them again, here's what we get. We get the original. If we invert that, we get this, right? So that's P equals 36 minus 4Q, and that's for any price in this range, 36 greater than or equal to P greater than or equal to 24. And if we invert that, right there, if we invert it, we're going to get 30 minus 2Q, and that's for P less than 24. Okay, now, these two functions, if you graphed them, you would get one of them that comes down like this, and you'd get the other one that comes from here and goes down. But all we're interested in is this portion of the two. They're going to intersect each other, and we're interested in this portion of it, okay? But what we really need is we need the marginal revenue curves that go with this, because we're going to be looking where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So what we want is marginal revenue. So remember that once you've got these demand curves, the marginal revenue curves are easy to find because you've got the same vertical intercept and twice the slope. So the marginal revenue is going to be, and let me just say this intersection right here, you'd need to set them equal to each other and solve, but you're going to get Q equal to 3, and you'll see why I want that up there here in just a second. So the marginal revenue curve for this portion is going to be P equals 36 minus 8Q. It's got the same intercept, vertical intercept, and twice the slope. This should be, let me say not P, because we're going to be writing marginal revenue. They're both in terms of dollars. So if you had P there, it's not the end of the world. You just have to remember that this is the marginal revenue curve. So let's just write marginal revenue. The marginal revenue curve that goes for this portion of the demand curve right there is going to be marginal revenue is equal to 30 minus 4Q. And this, so here's what this ends up looking like. If you were to draw these, this one comes down like that, and this one actually comes down like this. There's the marginal revenue curve. You've actually got this little gap right there that happens at a quantity of 3. So I'm going to say this is true for Q less than 3, and this is true for Q greater than 3. And this really is not that important, this portion of it. Because what we're going to do, our marginal cost is down here. So our marginal cost curve actually intersects right out here where both firms are producing, or excuse me, where the firm is going to sell to both groups. If we had our marginal cost up higher, like if it was 23, it would intersect right over here where the firm only sells to the high willingness to pay group. And that's not very interesting. So figuring out Q equal to 3 is not that important. This portion of the marginal revenue curve, this one right here, is the one that we're really actually interested in. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out where marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect. So if I put my marginal cost curve up here, it's going to be, let's put it right over here, it's going to be here at 4, right? And so there's our marginal, there's demand, there's marginal revenue, here's marginal cost. What we're looking for is we're looking for where marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect. Remember, what we're doing right now is we're just thinking about the firm not price discriminating, okay? So what this firm is doing is we've got the market demand curve, the market marginal revenue curve, and we're figuring out where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. I'm gonna put a little box down here, and I'm gonna solve for that right here. Marginal revenue, so we're looking where marginal cost intersects this thing, marginal revenue, right there. So I'm going to say marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Marginal revenue is 30 minus 4Q equal to marginal cost, which is 4, right? So that gives us 4Q equals 26. Q is going to be equal to 6.5. This quantity is 6.5. Now we want the price, so we need to plug that price into this portion of the market demand curve, right? We're going to plug that into this portion right there, okay, to get price. And so when we do that, we get, so let's circle our quantity. Now we want price. Price is equal to 30 minus 2 times quantity, which is 6.5. Right, so that's 13. 30 minus 13, that's a P of 17. Right, so this quantity right here is $17. Okay, what I need to do is I'm going to clear off this portion of the board, and then we're going to continue working through this, and we'll see how much profit the firm makes, and then we'll figure out what would happen if the firm price discriminates. So we've got our price of 17. What we can do is we can see now how much is sold to each group. So let's plug that price into each group's demand curve. So remember our quantity for the high group looks like this. It's 9 minus P over 4, so 9 minus 17 over 4. Because we're talking about a price of 17, what we're going to do is see what the quantity sold to each group is. And so what we get there is the quantity sold to the high group is equal to 4.75. For the low group, low willingness to pay group, we get Q equals 6 minus 17 over 4. That's Q equals 1.75. So there's the quantity. Remember, the firm doesn't know anything about who's who in each group. The firm's just selling the good, every unit at 17, and it's going to sell a total of 6.5 units, and this is who's going to end up buying them, but the firm can't tell anything about that. Let's talk about profit. So remember, we're ignoring fixed costs here. So I'm going to say fixed costs are equal to 0. That means that marginal cost and average total cost are equal to each other. Okay? So what we can do is we can easily calculate profit. So let's figure out revenue first. Revenue is price times quantity. Price is 17 times a quantity of 6.5. Now we've got to subtract off total costs. Well, total costs, each unit costs the firm $4. So I'm going to say minus 4. So it's 4 times however many units they sell times 6.5. Right? This, you probably recognize, this is nothing more than total revenue minus total cost, or you can think about it as profits equal to price minus average total cost multiplied by Q. If we factored that Q out, you'd have price minus average total cost. Anyway, that comes up to $84.50. 84.5. Single price monopoly. So it took a little while because we first had to come up with the market demand curve that was kind of a little bit weird, but no big deal. Now what we want to do is think about what happens if the firm engages in third degree price discrimination. So what if the firm is able to identify these two groups? So what the firm's going to do, let's start by thinking about our, yes, right here, high willingness to pay. And then we'll also think about low willingness to pay. So the two groups, what the firm is going to do is it's going to equate marginal revenue and marginal cost for each group. And it's going to choose a different price for each group. So remember, the demand curve for our high willingness to pay group looked like this. PH equals 36 minus 4QH. That's our inverse demand curve for the high willingness to pay group. Low willingness to pay, it looks like this. PL equals 24 minus 4QL. Our marginal revenue for that high willingness to pay group is 36 minus 8QH. Same intercept, twice the slope. Our marginal revenue curve for the low willingness to pay is 24 minus 8QL. And we're going to set marginal revenue. I'm going to draw a line here so we don't get them mixed up. Marginal revenue equal to marginal cost for each group. Right? We're going to be looking for this point for the high group, and we're going to be looking for that point for the low group. Remember, these are constant. That's 4. That's 4. There's our marginal cost. So 36 minus 8QH equals 4. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. 32 equals 8QH. QH equals 4. Firm's going to sell 4 units to the high willingness to pay group. If you plug that 4 in, there's 4. If you plug that in to the demand curve, what you're going to get is a price of 20. And you can see, now that they're price discriminating, they're going to charge that high willingness to pay group a price of 20 rather than that price of 17 if they had to charge everybody the same price. Let's figure out what they're going to do for the low willingness to pay group. So marginal revenue equals marginal cost. 24 minus 8QL equals 4. So 8QL equals 20. And Q is equal to 20 over 8, which is equal to 2.5. And if you plug that back in to get the price, what you're going to get is the price that they charge to the low willingness to pay group is 14. So this is 2.5, 14. If you calculate the profit, go through the same process here. For each of these, we've got price and quantity. The profit that they're going to earn from this high willingness to pay group is going to be equal to $64, and the profit from the low willingness to pay group is equal to 25. That's very easy to do, which means that the total profit, if they price discriminate, I'm going to say total profit is equal to $89. So you can see that the profit, if they have to charge everybody the same price, was 84.5, and if they can price discriminate, they're able to increase their profit. What I want to do now is clear this off, and then I'm going to show you how this problem would work if we actually had increasing marginal cost, because that's actually the more common situation. And what we'll see is that it's not any more challenging. The setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, this step right here is a little more complicated, but not much. It's just a little bit more algebra. So we'll clear this off and then we'll take a look at that. If we allow marginal cost to not be constant, which is the more realistic situation, it complicates things a little bit because we can't treat the two markets as separate like we did in the previous example where we had the high willingness to pay group and the low willingness to pay group. And the reason we can't do that is because the more that's produced for one group, then the less we're producing for the other group, and that means that changing the quantity in one group changes the quantity in the other, so the marginal costs are going to be different. And so we have to take that into consideration. The problem is still relatively straightforward. You just have to keep in mind that there's a little extra twist to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to assume that all of the output is produced in the same facility, let's say. And our marginal cost now, let's have it be upward sloping. Let's say that marginal cost is equal to 0.75 plus Q over 2. So now, remember our inverse demand curves look like this. For our high willingness to pay group, it was this, PH equals 36 minus 4QH. And for our low willingness to pay group, it was PL equals 24 minus 4QL. So there's our inverse demand curves. And let's do the same thing. Let's start with the single price monopoly, and then we'll figure out what they would do if they're not getting a price discriminate, and then we'll think about what they do if they price discriminate. So let me draw that picture quickly for our market here. I'm not going to worry about all of the individual pictures, but remember our market picture looked something like this. This quantity of 3 was important, this price of 36 and 24. So we had something that looked like this, came down to right here, and then looked like that. And then we had a marginal revenue curve that looked something like that. So there's our marginal revenue. Here's demand. So we've already talked about how to come up with that. Now we've got a marginal cost curve that instead of being horizontal simply looks something like this. So there's our marginal cost. And what we're looking for is where does marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect? Where are they equal? And so what we're going to do is we're going to set, remember, our marginal revenue curve. Let's say marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Marginal revenue, what we saw for this portion, that was 30 minus 4Q. That's our marginal revenue. And we're setting that equal to marginal cost, equal to 0.75 plus Q over 2. I'm going to save you from watching the algebra. It's easy. Just gather stuff in the appropriate places. If you work at that algebra, what you're going to get is Q equals 6.5. And if you plug that quantity back into this portion of the demand curve, you're going to get a price equal to 17. And this marginal cost curve was chosen because those are the same price and quantity, right? So this is 6.5 and this is 17. Okay? Same price and quantity we had just a second ago with constant marginal cost. If you plug that into that price of 17 into the individual demand curves, what you get is the quantity sold to the high willingness to pay group, 4.75, and the quantity to the low willingness to pay group of 1.75. Those add up to the 6.5. So that, again, is set up to be just like the thing that we did a second ago, except now we've got an increasing marginal cost. Essentially, it just intersects the marginal revenue at the same place that the constant one did. So now let's suppose that this monopoly decides to price discriminate. So rather than setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost for each group, what we have to do is we've got to recognize that the marginal cost in each group depends on the amount produced for each group. And so it's not just a matter of what we did a second ago with marginal revenue equals marginal cost in the high willingness to pay and marginal revenue equals marginal cost in the low willingness to pay. What we have to do is we have to use what's known as the first equal marginal principle. And the first equal marginal principle is what tells us that marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal to each other when profit is being maximized. The first equal marginal principle is the result of a calculus problem, which we don't need to work through that, but it simply tells you that two marginal things are going to be equal. Now, if we've got two groups here, the first equal marginal principle tells us two things. It tells us that marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal, but it also tells us that the marginal revenue is going to be equalized between the two groups. And that's how we're actually going to solve this problem. What we're going to do is we're going to horizontally sum the two marginal revenue curves to come up with the market marginal revenue curve. Okay? And so remember that our marginal revenue curve for the high willingness to pay group look like this. Marginal revenue high equal to 36 minus 8QH. And our marginal revenue for the low willingness to pay group was equal to 24 minus 8QL. There's our marginal revenue curves. We need the market marginal revenue curve. So we need to go through the same process that we did to find the market demand curve, except instead of doing it with the demand curve, we need to do it with the marginal revenue curves. Now, we need to horizontally sum them. In order to horizontally sum, we have to invert those two things to solve for Q, because we're going to be adding the quantities up. I'm going to save you some algebra here, but if we invert those two things to solve for QH and QL, we're going to get this. QH is equal to 4.5 minus marginal revenue H over 8, and QL is equal to 3 minus marginal revenue L over 8. I've simply inverted these two, so it'd be good to just work through the algebra just to get the practice of inverting them. But that's what you're going to get if you add them up. Quantity in the market is equal to the quantity in the high group plus the quantity in the low group. We're going to add these two up. What we get is, and I'm going to drop the subscripts on marginal revenue here because I don't care at this point. So we get this, Q equals 7.5 minus marginal revenue over 4. That is the inverse of the market marginal revenue curve. I need to invert that to get the market marginal revenue curve. So when I invert, I get this. Marginal revenue is equal to 30 minus 4Q. So there's my marginal revenue curve. Now I'm going to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So I'm going to be setting 30 minus 4Q equal to 0.75 plus Q over 2. You're going to end up getting, when you work through the algebra, that Q equals 6.5. Now, here's what's important. We're going to use this to figure out what happens in each group. Okay, so at that quantity of 6.5, if you plug that quantity of 6.5 into the marginal revenue curve, out of that is going to come a marginal revenue of 4. So at this quantity, marginal revenue equals 4. That's how we're going to figure out the price discrimination part of this. So we're going to figure out the quantity for each group now by using that first equal marginal principle that the marginal revenue is going to be equalized between the two groups. So we know that for each group, the marginal revenue is equal to 4. So I'm going to set that equal to the marginal revenue for each group, equal to each of these. So let's do our high group first. So 36 minus 8QH is equal to 4. That's marginal revenue equals 4. Okay? When you solve that, you're going to get QH equals 4 units. If we do this, so this is our high willingness to pay group. Let's do it now for our low willingness to pay group. We get 24 minus 8QL equals 4. So marginal revenue equals 4. And QL equals 2.5. If we find the price in each market, if you plug those back into the original inverse demand curves, you'll get the price. The price is going to be here, price is going to equal 20. Here, price equals 14. Same thing. Price is higher for the high willingness to pay group, lower for the low willingness to pay group. So you can see that even if we allow marginal cost to be upward sloping, it's not constant now. We have to go through this kind of unusual thing where we find the market marginal revenue curve, but the process is very similar. And these numbers were chosen, that particular marginal cost curve was chosen because the numbers work out to be the same, whether you allow marginal cost to be upward sloping or have it be constant. Let's talk a little bit now about product variety. So we're going to think about producers that sell different versions of a product. So maybe you've got a producer that sells hardback books versus paperbacks. And we have to think about whether or not that is going to be, and they sell them at different prices. Is that price discrimination? If the price difference actually reflects a difference in the cost of production between a hardback book and a paperback book, then it's not price discrimination. But if it doesn't, then what we do is we would end up looking at the net prices. So if there can be price discrimination if there are different varieties, if the two products are sold to different groups of customers at different net prices. In other words, the price minus the cost of production. One question that we need to think about is whether or not different versions enhances the firm's ability to price discriminate. Does it make it easier for them to price discriminate or less easy, at least to profit from it? And remember that for the firm to be able to price discriminate, they have to be able to identify consumer willingness to pay and prevent arbitrage. And it turns out that offering different versions often allows customers to reveal their willingness to pay. And it also helps prevent arbitrage. So offering different versions can enhance the firm's ability to price discriminate because it gives customers an ability to identify, self-identify the group they belong to. It also can help prevent arbitrage because if you have customers that buy a hardback book and customers that buy a softback book, it's harder for the customers that get the lower price to turn around and sell it to the other customers because those other customers are more likely to buy the variety that matches their preferences. So it's actually easier to prevent arbitrage with multiple varieties because each customer is drawn to the variety that they like the most. So it makes it harder for those customers in one group to sell to customers in the other group. Let's talk about finally, the impact of this price discrimination on social welfare. In other words, does it increase total surplus or decrease total surplus or have no effect on it? One thing that we can do is that we can show, I'm not going to go through a proof of this because wouldn't be useful. it's okay to just know that it depends on whether or not total output in the market increases or decreases or stays the same. So if we have a single price monopoly versus a monopoly that price discriminates, if total quantity in the market goes up, then we can demonstrate that that means that total surplus is increased. That's actually a sufficient condition. Let's say this. It's a necessary condition for welfare to increase relative to a single price monopoly. So if we think about the example that we just did, what we had is a situation where the quantity was the same. So we can say that total welfare in our case goes down. Total quantity has to go up for there to be the possibility that it makes total welfare increase. If total quantity does not increase, you know total welfare decreased. Okay? So it's a necessary condition. Often what we see is that price discrimination a lot of times allows the monopoly to serve markets that weren't served before. And in that case, it's typically the case that total quantity goes up because you have consumers that weren't even in the market before now buying. So oftentimes price discrimination does result in an increase in total surplus. So that's all we've got for this linear pricing video. I'll see you in the next video.